My sister stole my diary as kids, but when she stole my business idea as adults, she made one fatal mistake: she underestimated my ability to adapt. Her rush to claim credit exposed her fraud, and the investors she manipulated turned their attention to the real creator. The sound of laughter still echoes in my memory, sharp and mocking as if it were yesterday. I had walked into the living room clutching a half-finished drawing, only to freeze at the sight before me. My sister stood in the center, holding my diary high like a trophy, her friends gathered around her in a circle of amusement. She was reading aloud my most private thoughts. My fears, my crushes, my insecurities, each word twisted into a joke, each sentence punctuated by their giggles. My cheeks burned, my throat tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. That was the first time I realized how fragile trust could be, how easily it could shatter with a single act of betrayal. I wanted to snatch the diary back, to scream at her, but my legs felt rooted to the floor. Instead, I stood there, invisible in my own home, listening as she turned my vulnerability into entertainment. When she finally noticed me, her smile widened, not with remorse but with triumph. "Relax," she said casually, tossing the diary onto the couch. "It's just a joke." But it wasn't a joke to me. It was a wound, deep and raw, one that would never fully heal. That incident became the seed of something darker between us. From then on, I guarded my words, my thoughts, my very self. I stopped writing in diaries, stopped confiding in her, stopped believing that she could ever be trusted. Yet the betrayal didn't end there. It was only the beginning. Her pattern of undermining me grew subtle, almost calculated. At school, I would spend nights perfecting a project, pouring effort into every detail, only to find her presenting an identical version the next day. Teachers praised her creativity, her neatness, her original ideas, while I sat in silence, my fists clenched under the desk. I wanted to expose her, to shout the truth, but proof was always elusive. She was clever enough to change just enough details to make it look different, yet the foundation was mine. I remember one particular science fair. I had built a model volcano, carefully painting the slopes, mixing the solution for the eruption. The night before the presentation, she wandered into my room, pretending to admire it. "That's nice," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. The next day she unveiled her own volcano, larger, flashier, but unmistakably copied from mine. The judges applauded her ingenuity, and I stood there, my own project overshadowed, my effort erased. The injustice gnawed at me, but what hurt more was the silence of the adults around us. Teachers, relatives, even our parents seemed blind to her manipulations. She had mastered the art of charm, weaving innocence into every smile, every word. At family gatherings, she became the golden child, the one who entertained with witty remarks, the one who drew admiration effortlessly. I watched from the sidelines, my achievements overlooked, my frustrations dismissed. At home, the imbalance was even more suffocating. My parents adored her, convinced she could do no wrong. When I tried to explain how she had stolen my work or mocked me, they brushed it off. "She's just teasing," they said. "Don't take it so seriously." Their words felt like another betrayal, a denial of my pain. It was as if my voice didn't matter, as if my truth was invisible. She thrived in that environment, basking in the attention while I learned to retreat into myself. I became cautious, wary, always anticipating the next trick. She would sometimes pretend to care, offering advice or help, but her kindness was never genuine. There was always a hidden barb, a subtle twist meant to sabotage me. One memory stands out vividly: the spelling contest. I had been practicing diligently, memorizing words late into the night. She offered to quiz me, her tone dripping with sisterly affection. I wanted to believe her, wanted to accept the gesture. But as she tested me, she deliberately gave me false tips, insisting certain spellings were correct when they weren't. I trusted her guidance, only to falter during the contest, stumbling over words I had been misled on. She watched from the audience, her expression unreadable, but I knew she had set me up to fail. These small betrayals accumulated like bricks, building a wall between us. Each incident reinforced my mistrust, each moment widened the gap. I stopped sharing my ideas, stopped seeking her approval, stopped letting her into my world. Yet the resentment simmered beneath the surface, a quiet storm waiting for its moment. Even in ordinary moments, the tension lingered. A board game would turn into a battle of manipulation, her bending the rules to win. A casual conversation would twist into mockery, her words laced with subtle digs. She thrived on control, on the satisfaction of seeing me falter. And I, in turn, learned to mask my emotions, to hide my anger behind silence. But silence is not the absence of feeling. It is the containment of it. Inside, I carried the weight of every betrayal, every humiliation. I replayed the diary incident in my mind, the laughter of her friends echoing like a cruel chorus. I remembered the stolen projects, the false affection, the golden child facade. Each memory was a scar, etched into the fabric of my childhood. There were moments when I wondered why she did it. Was it jealousy? Was it a need for validation? Or was it simply the thrill of power? I searched for answers, but none came. All I knew was that her actions shaped me, molded me into someone cautious, guarded, unwilling to trust easily. And yet, despite the pain, I couldn't entirely sever the bond. She was my sister, bound to me by blood and circumstance. There were fleeting moments of normalcy, times when we laughed together or shared secrets. But those moments were fragile, overshadowed by the betrayals that lurked beneath. The growing distance between us was inevitable. I withdrew into solitude, finding comfort in books, in art, in anything that allowed me to escape. She continued to shine in the eyes of others, her charm unchallenged, her innocence unquestioned. But I knew the truth. I carried it with me, silently, like a hidden weapon. Looking back, I see how those childhood betrayals planted the seeds of rivalry. They were not isolated incidents but part of a pattern, a cycle that defined our relationship. Each act of undermining, each moment of false affection, each instance of parental favoritism added fuel to the fire. The wall between us grew taller, stronger, until it became a fortress. I lived inside it, protected yet isolated, while she thrived outside, basking in admiration. The resentment I carried was not loud or explosive. It was quiet, simmering, waiting. And though I didn't know it then, those seeds would grow into something far more complex, far more consuming. But in that moment, as a child, all I felt was the sting of betrayal, the ache of invisibility, and the silent vow that I would never let her break me again. The silence after childhood betrayals had hardened me, but I still believed adulthood might soften her edges. Years had passed and I convinced myself that time could change people, that maturity might bring honesty. So when I sat across from her one evening, the glow of my laptop illuminating the sketches of a business plan I had been nurturing for months, I let my guard down. "It's different," I told her, sliding the draft across the table. "Not just another startup idea. This one could actually work." She leaned forward, her eyes wide with interest, nodding at every detail I explained. I spoke about the gaps in the market, the way technology could bridge them, the potential to create something meaningful. Her silence felt like attentiveness, her occasional questions like genuine curiosity. For the first time in years, I thought maybe she wanted to support me. "You've really thought this through," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth I hadn't heard in a long time. "I'm proud of you." Those words disarmed me. I believed them. I believed her. Weeks later, the betrayal struck like lightning. A colleague approached me at a networking event, his smile broad, his tone congratulatory. "Your sister's pitch was brilliant," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "She really sold that idea." My stomach dropped. "Her pitch?" I asked, forcing a laugh, though my chest tightened. "Yeah, the venture she presented last week. The one about bridging market gaps with tech solutions. Honestly, I didn't know she had such vision." I stood frozen, the noise of the event fading into a dull hum. My idea, my dream, had been stolen, dressed in her words, paraded as her creation. The betrayal was sharper than any childhood prank, more devastating than a copied school project. This wasn't just about pride. It was about years of work, about the future I had envisioned. Her sudden claim exposed cracks almost immediately. Investors were intrigued by her presentation, but her lack of depth became obvious. She exaggerated numbers, inflated projections, and stumbled over technical details. I heard whispers of confusion, of skepticism. One investor confided in me after a meeting. "She's ambitious," he said carefully, "but something feels off. The numbers don't add up." I nodded, hiding my turmoil. Inside, I was torn between anger and a strange satisfaction. Her greed had pushed her too far, and the truth was beginning to surface. I began to quietly gather evidence. Emails she had sent with inconsistent figures, notes from meetings where she contradicted herself, recordings of her pitches where she dodged basic questions. Each piece was a fragment of the larger picture, proof of her deception. The day I attended one of her presentations, I sat in the back, unnoticed. The room was filled with polished suits, the air thick with anticipation. She stood at the front, her confidence radiating at first, her voice steady as she introduced her vision. But as the questions began, cracks widened. "How do you plan to sustain growth beyond the first year?" one investor asked. She hesitated, her smile faltering. "We'll adjust strategies as needed." Another pressed, "What's your customer acquisition cost? You mentioned scaling quickly, but the math doesn't align." Her eyes darted across the room, searching for an escape. "It's flexible. We're still refining the numbers." The murmurs grew louder. I watched her stumble, her charm unraveling under scrutiny. My heart pounded, not with sympathy but with a cold sense of justice. After the meeting she spotted me. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering across her face. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice low, sharp. "Listening," I replied calmly. "It's fascinating to hear you explain my idea." Her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time she looked cornered. I didn't confront her further. Not yet. I wanted her downfall to be undeniable, tied to her own greed. Confronting her privately would only give her room to twist the narrative, to paint herself as misunderstood or victimized. I knew her too well. Said I waited. I let her continue weaving her web, knowing it would collapse under its own weight. Each misstep, each inconsistency, each exaggerated claim was another thread pulling her closer to exposure. In the meantime, I worked quietly, refining my original plan, strengthening it with data, building connections with people who valued authenticity. I didn't announce my intentions, didn't seek sympathy. I let silence be my weapon, patience my ally. But the emotional toll was heavy. Nights were restless, filled with questions. Why had I trusted her again? Why had I believed she could change? The sting of betrayal wasn't just professional. It was personal, cutting into the fragile hope I had carried for reconciliation. One evening, I overheard her on a call, pacing the hallway, her voice strained. "They're asking for numbers I don't have," she whispered urgently. "I can't keep stalling. I need something solid." Her desperation was palpable. I leaned against the wall, listening, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and pity. She had built her success on lies, and now the foundation was crumbling. The turning point came when an investor invited me to a private discussion. "We've heard rumors," he said cautiously, "that the idea wasn't hers. That it originated with you." I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Rumors have a way of finding the truth," I replied. He nodded slowly. "We need clarity. If you're willing, present your vision. Show us the real plan." That moment solidified my decision. I wouldn't confront her in the shadows. I would let the truth unfold in the light, undeniable and public. Her downfall wouldn't come from my accusations. It would come from her own greed, her own inability to sustain the lie. And as I prepared for that day, I carried with me the weight of every betrayal, every stolen moment, every dream she had tried to claim. This time I wouldn't be silent. This time the truth would speak louder than her charm. The day of the investor meeting arrived with a weight that pressed against my chest. I walked into the conference hall carrying a folder thick with notes, sketches and prototypes, every detail of the vision I had nurtured long before she claimed it as her own. The air was charged with anticipation, the kind that makes silence feel louder than words. Investors sat in polished rows, their eyes sharp, their pens poised. My sister was already at the front, her smile rehearsed, her confidence brittle beneath the surface. When the moderator invited me to speak, I rose slowly, steadying my breath. My footsteps echoed across the room as I approached the podium. I laid my folder on the table, opened it and began to present, not with theatrics but with clarity. I showed the original timelines, the prototypes I had built with my own hands, the notes dated months before she ever spoke of the idea. Each page was a piece of truth, undeniable and irrefutable. The room shifted. I felt it in the way investors leaned forward, their brows furrowing, their pens pausing mid-sentence. The atmosphere thickened with realization. My words carried weight not because they were loud but because they were honest. I glanced at her. Her face drained of color, the confident mask slipping. She tried to interject, her voice trembling. "That's not how it happened," she stammered, her words tangling. We worked on this together. But the evidence lay before them, stark and unyielding. My notes bore my handwriting, my prototypes carried the marks of my effort, my timelines aligned with the truth. Her arguments collapsed under the weight of proof. One investor, a man with silver hair and piercing eyes, turned to her. "You misrepresented this," he said flatly. "The inconsistencies we noticed now make sense." Her lips parted but no sound came. The investors' gazes grew colder, their admiration evaporating into suspicion. Then the shift happened. Their attention redirected to me. Questions poured in, about scalability, about market entry, about long-term vision. For the first time my voice filled the room with authority. I answered with precision, my confidence rooted not in performance but in authenticity. "How do you plan to sustain growth?" one asked. I unfolded a chart, pointing to projections I had refined over months. "By focusing on customer retention first, then scaling gradually. The numbers align with realistic expectations." Another leaned forward. "What differentiates your model from competitors?" I smiled faintly. "We're not chasing trends. We're solving a problem that's been overlooked. That's our edge." Their nods carried weight. Their pens moved again, this time recording my words, not hers. As the meeting progressed, I felt a strange duality within me. On one hand, triumph surged, justice unfolding before my eyes. On the other, a quiet question lingered. Had revenge gone too far? Watching her unravel, her shoulders tense, her eyes darting desperately, I wondered if exposing her publicly was cruel. But then I reminded myself, silence would have meant surrender. If I had stayed quiet, she would have continued to thrive on deception, and my dream would have been buried under her lies. Speaking out wasn't about destroying her. It was about reclaiming myself. The meeting ended with a clarity that left no room for doubt. Investors shook my hand, their voices warm, their interest genuine. "We'd like to discuss this further," one said. "Your vision has potential." I nodded, my chest lighter than it had been in years. For the first time I felt seen, not as the shadow of the golden child, not as the silent sibling, but as myself. She lingered near the exit, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed on the floor. I walked past her, our shoulders nearly brushing, but neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavier than words. That evening at home, the air was thick with unspoken tension. We sat across the table, the remnants of dinner untouched. She avoided my gaze, her fork tracing meaningless patterns on her plate. I studied her face, searching for anger, for defiance, for some spark of the sister I once knew. But all I saw was avoidance, a refusal to meet the truth head-on. "You knew what you were doing," I said quietly, my voice steady. Her hand froze mid-motion. She didn't look up. I thought I could handle it," she whispered. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. "It wasn't yours to handle." The silence stretched, filling the room like a storm that refused to break. Yet as I sat there, I felt no anger anymore. The fury that had burned inside me for weeks had dissolved, replaced by something calmer. My revenge was complete, not because I had destroyed her reputation, but because I had reclaimed my own dignity. I realized then that revenge wasn't about watching her fall. It was about standing tall myself. It was about refusing to be silenced, refusing to let betrayal define me. Later that night I walked into my study, the folder still resting on the desk. I opened it, running my fingers over the pages, the prototypes, the notes. They weren't just evidence. They were pieces of me, fragments of the journey I had fought to protect. I thought about the years of silence, the childhood betrayals, the stolen dream. Each moment had led to this resolution, this reclaiming of my voice. And as I closed the folder, I felt a quiet closure settle over me. The rivalry had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. I had spoken, I had been heard, and that was enough. The next morning she passed me in the hallway, her eyes flickering briefly toward mine before darting away. There was no confrontation, no apology, no attempt at reconciliation. Just silence. And I accepted it. Some wounds don't heal with words. Some closures come not from forgiveness but from reclaiming what was lost. I stepped outside, the air crisp, the world alive with possibility. For the first time in years I felt free, not from her but from the weight of betrayal.